Welcome to The Growing Band Director, the podcast that dives into topics applying to all of us band directors. My name is Kyle Smith, and joining me is my friend and colleague Jeff Smith. Together we discuss many aspects of the school band program, including how to build your concert, jazz, and marching programs, as well as everything else we do as band directors. More importantly, we'll discuss concepts that help us all improve our own programs every day. Always remember the famous quote by Ray Kroc, "When you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you rot." Let's get started. So yeah, the bass clarinet, what ended up happening was the when I just turned it a little bit, right, it ended up working fine.
So it's a two-piece bass clarinet instead of a solid piece.
Yeah.
Okay, if I had known that, I would just said the bridge key was not set up right. I'm used to one-piecers because I always had problems with two-piecers, especially during marching season. We'd be playing along, and piece A would go right, and piece B would go left, and the tendon would be sheared off. So I stopped buying them.
Yeah.
But that one that you loaned, Angelina, not a bad horn at all. Older horn, but it had a lot of clearness through all the registers. I was very impressed.
Yeah, those horns have played great. Joe's worked on them a bunch. They're super old. I think they're LeBlanc's, right? Vito.
Yeah, it was a Vito.
Whatever. Yeah, and they tend to play well. And Joe Betancourt, yeah. I don't know if you and I have talked about Joe, but he is like the magician of all things repair, and he's great. So
where is he located?
He lives in Cape Elizabeth. He's retired. He has his own business, and he worked for Music and Arts for a super long time. But he has a great clinic he does at Allstate that's called 5 minutes before the downbeat. Like all the stuff that breaks right before the concert that you need to fix. Like what are those tips and tricks? And he can just fix it, anything right away if it can be fixed quickly.
Right. Yep.
So
the spring routine for a ligature, dental floss, the use of gum and zigzag paper, making a spring with a paper clip or a straight pin, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
Well, I'm excited to do this second episode. The first episode went well, I thought. We talked about jazz band and that stuff. And today we're talking about concert band rehearsal, and I would like to turn it into like a bag of tricks of all these things that we can do to make our concert band rehearsals go well. And we're going to talk about how it's the most important ensemble we teach, right, and how everything else feeds off of that. But I wanted to start by sharing a story with you, because we had band rehearsal today at the end of the day, and it was one of those, you get to those Fridays, and some Fridays are just Fridays, and other Fridays are like, whoa, there's like stuff happening, right? So I noticed, like, the kids are coming in the room and the energy is like everywhere. There's just so much energy. And our classes are so long, they're like 75 minutes. It's not like a 35 or 40 that I can like, let's just play a lot of like loud, fast stuff and be done. Like we had to do some things. And so I talked to my student teacher and I was like, they're in one of those moods right now. I have to do something about this. So it was really cool because I knew that. And my whole goal was to basically take their heart rate and just lower it down and get them to focus for the rehearsal, right? So what I decided to do was when I got on the podium and they weren't ready right away. They didn't stop right away when I had asked them to. So I said, nope, no problem. Keep playing. We'll try that again. So I got off. Of course, I was just being annoying, right? And I got on and they did it quickly. And then I had them do breathing, 4 bars in, or so 4 beats in, 4 beats out. That, we did a little bit of breathing just to get them to like, okay, let's just calm down, right? And after that, what did we do? We did like some F major, just Remington F. You repeat after me, right? Like quarter notes, eighth notes, triplets, just getting them like kind of playing all together, blah, 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 blah. We worked into this F. We then moved to E flat major and we did like a simple chorale, right? just like played it really, really well. And then I let them switch up parts in the chorale, so they did something different. I then had them go to the minor version of that tune and of that scale because we were doing the Shostakovich Prelude in E flat minor. So that was a transition to that. So anyway, we did like a couple little basic exercises in that to get them going, and we did like this 1-2-1 exercise, which I know you know, but for people who listen, it was like 1-1-2-1, 1-2-3-2-1, 1-2-3-4-3-2-1, 1-2-3-4-5-4-3. You just add one. We didn't do it that fast. And then we did it in two parts, highs and lows. And then we did it alternating people, so ones and twos and ones and twos. So they had to do it with people around them doing the other part, right? So I just really got their brain focused on like working and getting better without reading too much music. And then we were able to go right into the Shostakovich E flat minor and then work on the other pieces we had to do. And by the end, we were working on some fast, high, loud stuff, and they had a great end to the rehearsal. And I was really proud of that because at the beginning of the rehearsal, it very well could have been like oh, this is going to be one of those rehearsals, and we're just going to slug it through and go. But I was like, nope, I can read them, and then I have enough tools in my toolkit to be able to create a good rehearsal from it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I was proud of that, and I wanted to share that story because today is really all about like what are the tools that you've used, what are tools that I've used, and and how do we get good rehearsals more often than not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to keep your percentages as high as possible.
So what I'd like to do is just start with a quick like we both believe the concert band is the center of the program. And for me, it's about building a culture of success, class behavior, enthusiasm, musicianship, performing students, like all these things comes from that concert band rehearsal. Can you give us just your sort of philosophy of how the groups work together and all that?
Okay. Well, I believe, as you do, that the hub of the band music program, is the concert band. From that are the different spokes of the wheel: the marching band, the jazz ensembles, the jazz combos, the small ensembles, the students who play with the orchestra, the students who play in pit orchestra, the students who play in other ensembles. But my rule was always, if you want to be in any of those ancillary ensembles, you must be an active and positive member of the concert band program. I did marching band a little bit different than you do. Marching band was part of the curriculum for the first quarter, for the first 10 weeks of the quarter. Concert band went on during school, marching band at night, and I had arrangements with my athletic directors that we rehearsed in the evening from 5:30 to 5 o'clock, to 8 o'clock at night, 2 nights a week, full band, and then all day Saturday. And then percussion and guard had their sectionals. And then depending on where we were in the season, sometimes we'd have an ensemble rehearsal for winds only another night. And that worked well for us. And it didn't create any numerical changes in the attrition of the program. And then kids from that went to jazz and kids went to the other groups, but they had to be in concert band to do it. And the one thing that I found that was a real positive was that it took care of all the likes of kids. There are some kids, they just wanted to play jazz. And there are some kids that just wanted to do marching. And there were some kids who just wanted to do winter percussion. And there were some kids who just wanted to do small ensembles and some who just wanted to do all state. And I said, well, that's great. I'm glad you all like to do these things, but to do those, you must be part of the concert band so that it's part of the curriculum. And my analogy was simply this: when you take algebra, can you say that I don't do polynomial equations, so I'm not going to do that part of algebra? Or I'm in English, I don't do major British writers, so I just skip that part of the curriculum. No, the whole curriculum was learning all the different facets. And what I found from it was that I had a great number of kids who said, oh, I want to play is jazz. In the end, said, I love playing jazz, but I've learned to love concert band far more than jazz because of how it fit into my life and how it led me along the way. And I think that was a recurring theme. I've got a lot of kids who are out playing professionally, and they all say, yeah, but I learned a lot about being a musician from concert band.
Yeah. So, and I've had people who say that the chamber music is the center of their program because that that's where the kids really learn how to play. And I understand that too. Concert band is more accessible, getting everybody in. But I think there's this common misconception, right? Concert band's boring, jazz band and marching band are fun. Like that's like a thing. That because if you don't teach concert band well, it can get long and boring, right? It's just not the case. Marching band should be loud and not musical. Jazz band should be high and loud. These are all false things, right? Like no matter what group you teach musicianship, teach all the emotions. If you tap into student and human emotions, you're going to be successful, right? So go ahead.
I agree with you 100%. I do a lot of judging, whether it be in jazz, concert band, or marching band, or winter guard or winter percussion. And the terms you said, like concert band isn't fun. I hear that and I say, why? And it always comes down to the reason it's not fun. It's because how the rehearsal is approached and how the rehearsal is run. It's some directors get caught up on one thing and they stay with it so long it becomes tedious and the kids don't want to continue. And then marching band, some kids say, well, it's just got to be very spirited, very loud. And I said, no, it doesn't. It can be very musical and very lyrical. And jazz band said, high and loud. Well, there are those moments, but if you teach repertoire that's conducive to the style, you should be doing a little bit of everything. And I think it's all comes down to, in the end, how do we teach and how were we taught?
Yep. So, so this is all about giving ideas for how to make those great rehearsals for kids, right? So I'm going to do a short plug. I'm able to separate in my concert band, which is our younger group. I have a separate class for percussion and a separate class for the wind players. And for anybody out there who's able to schedule it, for us, it was simple. It's just another section of concert band. And our guidance people are able to put them in the correct section of concert band. And it's been amazing because they can work on percussion ensemble, timpani stuff, snare drum stuff, mallet stuff, all the auxiliary percussion, percussion solos. They can do all these things they could never do if they were with the wind players. And the wind players also don't have to deal with the teacher dealing with percussion stuff. We can go slower and work on things that the wind players need. So I put that as a plug out there for those people who might be able to separate into two sections. It also allows you to teach another band class and get to know the kids a little bit bigger. So I wanted to start maybe just giving some of my ideas on how I approach the week and how I approach some warm-ups. If that's all right with you, Jeff?
Sure.
Okay.
Can I make about what you were talking about with percussion?
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. I wasn't afforded that because I had 3 separate concert bands and there wasn't enough room in the schedule to add another section. Yeah. But my colleague, who inherited my program, was able to work it out where they were able to give him a stipend to allow an outside percussionist come in, and he would take the percussionists 3 to 4 days a week and just work with them, as you said, and it's made a remarkable improvement in the understanding and the abilities of the percussionist. So if I could do it all over again, I would try to do it your way.
Yeah, it's worked great. So for me, I have to plan the week ahead of time. So in our case, we had a concert that's supposed to be April 6th. It had to be moved up because of stuff going on in our community to March 23rd. So all of a sudden, the next 5 weeks turns into the next 3 weeks. So we had 4 pieces that we were really going to be doing. One of those is moved to another concert. Now we're down to 3, and that's fine because the program's going to work really, really well. But I have to plan for the week before the week starts. So I kind of go, okay, if these are the 3 pieces we want to do, how many times do I want to do this piece? How many times do I want to do that piece? How many times do I want to do this piece? Because I find if I don't plan that out ahead of time, we might do one piece 4 days in a row and we don't touch another piece, right? So the looking long-term first works really well. For me, I tend to choose a key of the week to warm up in. I'm going to get to like scale work and stuff later, but I try to just plan that big stuff right now. How much time, what number of pieces? Is this a day that we work on one piece the whole time? Is this a thing that we do like 3 different pieces, but different portions of it? So I'll try to plan that in my head ahead of time. And then I'll take the rehearsal plan for the day and I'll always put it on the board. Right? I know that's not a new thing, but when the kids will walk in, they can see, okay, what are we doing today? They can have their stuff ready, and they can be ready to go. That makes them responsible for having their percussion stuff out that's needed or their music in order and all that. So I want to start talking about some warm-up stuff, but I wanted to let you jump in and anything you had to say about what I was talking about.
Well, I agree. I too had to have my lesson plan submitted by 7:30 in the morning on Monday for every week. And we did our concert program based on every 8 weeks we had a concert, no matter what. And how we did it was that same as you. It was on the board for the whole week, so they knew what they had to practice for what days and specifically what sections. I did it so
Another
that
way
there.
to do that too is you can, if you don't have room on your board, you can post the rehearsal on the wall as they come in or whatever, so they can see what days are we doing the Granger, what days are we doing Holst or whatever.
Yep, that's another way. And now, back then, we didn't have the internet like you have now. You could also send out an email or a text to all the kids saying what's going on ahead of time so they know. But I had a rule. My warm-ups never lasted more than 5 minutes.
Yep.
Within 5 minutes, we did breathing, we did lip slurs, we did B flat scales in different patterns. We do the 1-1-2-1 like you're going to talk about later. And then we did all of the major scales up and down with an arpeggio. Okay. Then when we're finished with that, depending on what pieces we were doing, we would take that and play a chorale in that section or some kind of piece in that section. What we did though is we took sections of the pieces and we highlight what we were working on, because I wanted to work on every piece every day. I had them for 47 to 54 minutes. Yep. So I wanted everything every single day. And then Thursdays or Fridays was run through days, depending on the length of the pieces. Might have to take 2 days to do all the run throughs with all the touch-up work that we had to do with those pieces at the same time. And it worked out fairly well for us. And we also, in the beginning of those weeks, on the first 4 or 5 weeks, there was always a sight reading piece at the end of every rehearsal. And then there was a brief warm down where we just do lip slurs one more time to get the muscles to relax for the brass players, because knowing that after school they'd be at least 1 to 2 other rehearsals that last 2 hours long.
Yeah. So I did want to mention some of the stuff I do for warm-ups in my bands. And I will say I use the metronome a lot. I use the keyboard a lot. That's through speakers. I don't have a harmony director. There's a lot of people who swear by the harmony director. There's a lot of things you can do with that to help tune your band and get your band with a better tone. It's expensive, but I do have some friends who use it, and I've heard a lot about that. So I'll plug that, even though I have not really used that before. Some things that I do with my band that I think are a little bit different. First of all, I learned from a colleague a long time ago to have my kids memorize B flat. So we haven't been successful every time this year, but we can start the rehearsal by humming B flat before they've played. And that's really just a learned pitch. And it's been more simple than I thought it was going to be. But what we can do with that is then they can hum up and down the scale as I wish, just using numbers. If I put up a 1, they hum 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. I can make that into 2 parts if I want of the band, and I can have them work on their pitch and their tone. I have them hum when they're more shy, so the pitch stays in their head and they can hear it better. I'll then have them open their lips to do a round O syllable or something like that as they're more confident. So I'll do things like that. A lot of people will use buzzing for brass players. I try to have them buzz a couple times a week. It should be every day. Something where your woodwinds are playing something and the brass get to buzz along with that, or whatever. And that's a huge deal for those people who are not brass players. There's also, they make this apparatus called the burp, B-E-R-P, right? That goes onto the lead pipe, and it doesn't really do a lot besides make it feel, I can tell you as a brass player, it makes it feel like you're playing the trumpet. It gives the same feeling of it, and you can use the valves and everything, and it really does help. They cost a little bit of money, but they do work really, really well. I'll use call and response as we'll get started sometimes. I'll play something on my trumpet, and they'll have to reply back. So it's a way, like in jazz band, to work on their ears as you're doing warm-up. And I do keep my trumpet with me all the time so I can model as much as I can for them. A lot of teachers do that, but I think there's a lot of teachers who get away from that. And I always want to keep them doing that. Another thing I like to use is something called a scale grid, which is not revolutionary. I do have this actually on the link to this episode. People will be able to click on that PDF. It just has all the scales going in the circle of fifths from left to right. So like C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And then the next row is the F scale, and the next row is the B flat scale. And it goes all the way around. And we'll do this when kids first come into high school as how I teach them all their scales. I don't teach them their scales one at a time. We work on the chromatic scale first within the first couple of weeks. And once they can do the full concert B flat chromatic scale, we'll then go to column 1 of that scale grid. So they'll play C, and then F, and then B flat, and then E flat, and then A flat, and then D flat. They'll go all the way around, and that takes a week or two to get it so they're all playing the right fingerings and they're all doing it. But once they can do that with a good sound, then the next week we can add the second column. So it's 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, right? You just slowly build it. And I find within a semester, the kids have learned all their scales, but they learn them all from left to right rather than, okay, B flat, E flat, A flat. Okay, great. Here's the D flat week. Okay, here's the G flat week, because that gets into some hairiness, right? And then you end up getting all flats, and you got to move over to sharps at different times depending on the instruments, and that's like a hairy time to do it too. So I found that approach works really well for our kids, and within that you can work on articulation and 1,000 other things within that too. So you said your kids played all major scales. How do you get to that point? Was your approach like any similar to mine, or completely different, or how did that go?
Quite similar. But what we did is we started like you did, C, and then we went to from there. And but their midterm exam was I had 3 cans in front of me, and one was flatted keys, one was sharp keys, one was either minor or chromatic keys. And for the midterm, I'd go in and pick out a slip, and they had to play that from memory standing up in front of the band. Yeah. Then I'd pick up the next one for the flat keys and do the same thing there and that. And I tested them at least every week or every other week on their major scales to make sure they knew them as part of their grade. And we were fortunate. We had pull-out lessons. So I saw every kid 1 lesson a week throughout the whole school year, unless they were studying privately. Yeah. And if they studied privately, then they only had to come in twice a quarter, to play for me to make sure that they were keeping up with everything else. And then my colleague and I wrote a lesson book. And that lesson book was part of a test that was held every Friday, where on say we're working on page 10 that week. Page 10, there's exercises 1 through 15, and you pick a slip of paper, and you had to play that one for your grade for that week. And it was based on, it was similar to the Charles Collins book, Jazz Rhythms, but it was a different style from that. And that worked real well. I found that helped my kids' reading a tremendous amount. And
what I think, if we go back to the scale thing for a second, what's really important is that both you and I insist that our kids learn their scales. Because we say that there's no hard scales, there's just unfamiliar ones, right? Like there are a couple notes that sometimes are harder to play on an instrument, right? Because of an awkward fingering, or maybe it's really out of tune or something. But for the most part, the majority of notes are not harder than others. Trombone 5th position is one, 7th position, 6th position. Those are clearly harder, right? But for the most part, if teachers insist that they find a way for their kids to learn their scales, then it demystifies everything. And I think, that's a really big deal, because some teachers just say, well, we play 1 scale, or maybe 2 or 3, but there's all these other ones, And the approach that I've taken, I feel really confident in, that you go from the chromatic scale, and as long as you see them for a semester or so, you can get them confident in all these other scales. Now, when our kids graduate, do they like the key of B as much as they like the key of C? Right? Like nobody does. Nobody does. But it really gets them on their way for that.
And for us, the little difference was that we had 3 orchestras. So from the 3 orchestras went against the 3 bands. So wind players would go to orchestra. So they were taught, especially the woodwind players, the transposition, everything you had to do there for orchestra, play with strings. But the other thing is, we based a lot of our teaching on rhythm patterns. We wanted to make sure that they knew as many of the rhythm patterns as possible. So when we would pick repertoire, one of our criteria in the department was that we picked at each concert based on a certain set of rhythms that we wanted to teach, plus the keys. And that made them better readers, I thought, in the process. And
Yeah.
since we did so much sight reading and so much testing on sight reading, that it pushed them forward. It propelled them a little bit quickly.
I do want to do a quick plug. You know, I've gone through a lot of books that I've used, and I couldn't really find a book that did everything that I wanted to. So I do have a book that I wrote about 8 years ago that isn't published or anything like that. It just has a bunch of stuff in it that I, as a band director, felt like I would want. I did put a sample of that in the link as well, so that PDF should be available for people who want to check it out. But in that, I basically did there's a section in each key. Right. So, and they have like the different scale forms, a chromatic techniques, and a major technique section. Then there's 2 articulation exercises, 2 interval exercises, 3 or 4 etudes, 2 melodies that kids should know, like famous tunes that they could play in that key, and 4 chorales where they could see all 4 parts, and they could all read one part or they can move it around as well. So, I wrote that with the high school brain in mind. You know, there's an articulation exercise that I wrote that goes like dun 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 dun, right? Like the 4th note clearly changes because they think, okay, the first 3 are done. Well, that's going to be the same. So the ability to write that has really worked well for my kids. So, you know, I put that in there in case anybody wants to see that. But that, you know, that approach of having the songs to play was a really, really big deal. I do want to take a quick pause and put a plug in for a business that I believe in very strongly. Jeff, have you heard about Maine Saxes?
No.
No. So Maine Sax is actually run by a friend of mine named Adam Montemy. And it's a great, it's a one-on-one saxophone specialty shop providing expert repairs, sales, and private lessons just north of Portland in New Gloucester, Maine. Owner Adam Montemy works with players individually by appointment, so you get personalized attention whether you need saxophone repairs or you're shopping for a horn, mouthpiece, reeds, or accessories. And Maine Saxes offers a carefully curated selection of overhauled vintage and modern saxophones, so you can test them in person knowing they're playing at their full potential, as well as some of the new handmade mouthpieces from artisans like Aaron Drake and Morgan Mouthpieces. You can visit mainsaxes.com. That's like the state Maine, M-A-I-N-E. Saxes.com for more information or to browse the current inventory of fine saxophones and mouthpieces. So Adam's a good friend, and I've had a lot of work done from him. And, you know, I'm not a saxophone player, but, you know, people who've taught with me and speak really highly of his work.
Great.
Jeff, did you know that kids join band not to hear you talk? They join band so they can play their instruments and they can be with their friends. Do you agree or disagree?
I will back it up a little bit differently. I will say that first, they want to be with their friends, and second, they've come to play. You are 100% correct. Band directors much do not have people who want to stay in their bands.
Okay, so the ones who talk too much. So time stopping to work on something has to be brief. You have to be able to read your students, and we're going to give you a lot of tips coming up here about how to rehearse things quickly and efficiently and all that. I try to keep it 60 seconds or less. Now, my wife would say in middle school, 15 seconds or less, right? Like if their horn is on their face, they can't get in trouble. Well, it's a lot harder for them to get in trouble. So I think too many people stop and they just get talking and talking and talking. And I think if we record our rehearsals, all of us do it too much. But I would rather err on the side of having the kids play too much than not enough.
Agreed. But I think part of the problem that occurs with band directors is that when we stop, we don't demand a clear stop and that there is silence during rehearsal. Our rule was real simple. When rehearsal began, if you had a question, the only time you talked is when you raised your hand and you were acknowledged. If you talked during the rehearsal, there was a consequence. Then you were given the opportunity to talk, and sometimes I'd say, okay, section leaders, you need to take care of this. Talk to your sections right now.
Yep.
But when I back up on the podium, it was silent. And I think that's the problem. I watch many band directors rehearse. They cut off and A, B, C, D. The groups of people they just play right through the cutoff.
Yeah.
And that's got to be clear and that's got to be concise, just as the beginning of a note has to be clear and concise. Attacks and releases, if you focus on that just through your rehearsal technique, then you don't have to talk as much. And then if you take Peter Boonshaft over at Hofstra, he did a great seminar at the Eastern MENC conference many years ago, talking about a rehearsal where the director doesn't say a word, but rehearse the piece without saying a word.
Yep.
And I watched him do it at an all Eastern conference where he rehearsed for an hour without saying a word to the group.
That's crazy, right?
Yep. It's wonderful, though. Get a lot done.
So one of the big things that I am a proponent of is while you're listening to the music, right? As you're listening, think about what you're going to say when you stop. One of my mentor and a very good friend of mine, Andy Boysen, he would always touch the score when there was a mistake that he wanted to come back to, because he was taught that, and I don't know where he learned this from, but there's something with the brain waves that when you touch that measure physically, it's easier to go back and remember what it was. And he says, always try to get this list of things that you want to go back and get, and you basically have to stop. He would always say, I think it was stop when your brain is full, like when you can't remember anymore. Stop and go back and fix them. I don't always get to that many because, or I might get to more because I want the kids to keep playing. But too many people just don't know what they're going to do when they stop, right? They stop and then they look down, and that's when the kids are going to have problems.
Well, another point is that if there's a problem in the music, I never stop at the problem. I wait quite a few measures before I would go back and discuss it, because that teaches the kids to stop when there's a mistake.
Yep.
And my comment always was, well, in the middle of a concert, you make a mistake, we're all going to stop and say, audience, ladies and gentlemen, we've made a mistake. We have to start again. You have to teach them to play beyond the mistake and fight through it and then go back. And I think Andy's point is well taken. I didn't use the hand, but I used to keep sticky notes next to my stand, and I'd just pick one up and lay it on a spot and pick one and lay it on a spot. And when I got to 4 stickies down, then I'd play a little beyond, and I'd go back and review the 4 stickies to talk about.
Yeah.
That way, I just pull them up. I lie. I used to leave them down, because then when I'd go back and review my score that night, I'd say, okay, this here potential problem areas that we have to rediscuss and see what approach we need to make it so it's better imprinted into the student's head.
Yep. Okay, so now let's talk about when you stop. Here are some things you can do to help fix things, right? Because okay, you figured out something's wrong. Did you figure out what was wrong? Did you figure out why it's wrong? Do you know how to fix it? Do you know how to fix it in a way that the 13-year-old or the 11-year-old or the 9-year-old, that's kind of young, 10-year-old or the 17-year-old, that they're ready to do it? And you have to approach the human in that way, right? So first thing for me is, when I try to fix it, I try to involve as many students as possible in teaching it. So if it's a rhythm concept, I'll throw a rhythm on the board or have it there already, right? And the kids have to clap it, they learn how to count it, whatever. The whole band does it. Then if the clarinets can't play that rhythm, we'll all clap the rhythm once we've learned it, and then the clarinets can play along with as we clap it. So the kids who are not in the clarinet section time goes faster because they're being taught. They learn the rhythm, and they help the clarinets do it as they do it. Another tip that I'll use is something called Pat with Me, which I get from some of my great general music friends, right? So if in general music, a lot of times they'll say, okay, everybody pat the beat with me, right? And you just kind of, whatever that piece is, and then the person starts singing. Well, what I do is, if I'm going to say, okay, we're going to work on the saxophone section, we're going to do this. Everybody, saxophones measure 71, everybody pat with me. So I'll count it off, and the band knows, if I don't have the metronome on, they know that they're responsible for patting the tempo as the saxophones play. And what does that do for them? Well, it helps the saxophones by helping the kids, help them keep the beat. Everybody has to listen to the saxophone part in order to keep the beat with it, right? And most importantly, they're still doing something. They're not sitting there doing nothing. So, the average time of, they're not playing, but they're invested and they're involved in that. And then, quite frankly, when I fix one thing, Jeff, I put it back. Okay, that was 73. Once they got it, great. Everybody at 73. Here we go. And then we see if they can do it with everybody in. And maybe we even do it more than once. Because too many people will fix 73 and then they move on to 88.
Right.
They never put it in context. Now, I think we'd probably agree, maybe we won't, that the older the kids are, you might not have to do that step. I know when I was at UNH, again, Dr. Boysen would say, all right, let's fix 48, blah, blah, got it. Let's fix 98, blah, let's got it. Let's fix 50, blah, blah, got it. Beginning, here we go. And the older musicians can put that in place. But I find for high school kids, definitely middle school kids, once you fix the problem, then have everybody play it at the same time on their own parts to see if they can do it in context.
Well, my general philosophy always this: don't practice what you know, practice what you don't know. And everybody can play the beginning of a piece well, and just about everybody can play the end of a piece well. But it's everything from those first 10 measures and those last 10 measures that, if you listen carefully, that's where rehearsals haven't functioned. And I do exactly the things that you do, but I do one thing differently. When we sight read, because we use this in our learning of music, is that the first time we go through a piece, we count the rhythms, like 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 4, 1, 1, whatever. I'd count through 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we'd go through our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Everybody would count the rhythms because we used a numeric syllabic system. And then when we'd come to a problem, like you said, where the clarinets couldn't play a rhythm, we'd either put it up on the board or we'd talk through it, and everybody would play that rhythmical pattern on their instruments so that they could get used to it. And in most cases, if we should know our scores well enough, realize, well, the clarinets have it here, but later the flutes have it here, the trumpet here, the saxophones have it here. Let's all go to those sections and play those. And if they aren't harmonically correct, well, then let's all play them on a concert, whatever. But if they're not harmonically correct, I'd say sometimes let's still play them together so we articulate them the same way and we play the rhythms the same way, and then go back and separate it. And similar to what Andy said, 47, 58, 64 for the older groups, and then maybe start at 35 and go through 70 a few times to make sure that's imprinted into what they're thinking about doing.
Yep. I use whisper counting when we're working on rhythm too, because then instead of, saying the counts works really well, but then sometimes they have a problem putting it on the horn. So that's the intermediary. If you can say 1, 2, and 3, and then they go, tss, 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 tss. My wife calls it wazoodling at the middle school. We call it whisper counting. I've also found that if you whisper count with them, like if they're doing something and you want to help them work with a rhythm, while the band's playing, if you whisper count like that from the podium, it cuts through the whole band, and the kids can hear it even as they're playing. So it's a way to help them with a rhythm if you need to, as it's coming around. One thing that works really well, if it's a finger problem, I've actually had sections do this where, okay, everybody, here's a run. We have to go dee da 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 dee da 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 dum, right? We don't play. They just have to finger it, and they have to finger it hard enough so that we hear the clicks of the keys or of the valves. So then what you're hearing is, and when it's all gross, then if they just get the clicks to line up, then they go ahead and play it, and it usually has fixed the fingers. So that's a good one for fingers. I don't know if you've used that or not, but that works for me.
I didn't call it whisper tonguing, but I did. That was, and then the clicking of the horns. Yeah, but also I would have them do the clicking of the horns, and I have what you call whisper tonguing do that at the same time. So they're using their fingers, but they're using their whisper tonguing separate from rather than in conjunction with.
Great, that's good. Many times I'll have the metronome going. When I was younger, I wouldn't use metronome. I just find that even on ballads and things, these young kids, like, that steady beat is just not ingrained in them. They need to continue to have that going forward. For me, it's not just a marching band tool. It's a jazz band tool. It's a concert band tool. It's a wind ensemble tool. It's a percussion ensemble tool. It's everything. If you don't know where the beat is, you're going to have a hard time doing everything else. So I don't use it forever, but I do use it consistently. There's sometimes when I want to quickly get a metronome to happen, and I'll have the snare drummer in back. Hey, would you give me eighth notes, please? Right? So you hear da, 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 and then you can have the part so they're listening back rather than listening forward to the metronome. So that's another thought that I had. I also think, Jeff, sometimes we don't let the kids fix what they can fix, right? So sometimes you hear the mistake once, and you go try to fix it as a teacher. But it's like, sometimes if you know they're new at it, sometimes they need a couple checks, couple runs to figure out what they can figure out. So, and I'm an advocate for that, but at the same time, if you go, well, let's just let them play it 1,000 times. Well, they're not going to get better if you just play. So I think when we advocate for the kids playing a lot, they have to also be given the right tools when needed. But, if you hear them screw it up like 3 times, to me, it's like, okay, now I know we need to work on that. At the same time, there's also other stuff that you have to teach before they do it once.
I also believe in giving section leaders a chance to talk and I'll stop and I'll say, ask a section leader to say, could you address section whatever it is, and have them go through and talk to the kids, because that builds esprit de corps and leadership within the group, so that the group realizes that there are members within the group that can help them. And then I quite often would say, okay, section leader, please help the third clarinets. Please just take a second, go up into the back studio room and go over that and come back in 5 minutes. And they take the third clarinets and go over it with them, so that I could work on something else with another group of kids. And I always had my clarinet ready to go. And then I'd always have a trombone or a euphonium there, and I just slam a mouthpiece in and go up and play with them. Because sometimes since I'm not a brass player and I'm a woodwind player, if
perfect.
I play
no one's perfect.
This fingering combination might work better. But as a woodwind player, I'll talk about, alternating sides, the slides that you can use, what the alternate fingerings are you can get to get a different pattern to come out. It's like, I'll use one of Andy's pieces, Danzon number 2. He has this section where it's going between altissimo B flat to a upper altissimo F, and just by the simple using of the 1 and 1 for the B flat going to the long F dot 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 dot.
You talking about clarinet?
Talking about clarinet, but it also occurs in the alto sax, where I could use some alternate fingerings there too. Things like that to help the kids. Quite often you go to watch festivals and you'll see kids using certain fingerings, and you're saying, boy, they're working really hard. And if they just would change their fingering to such and such, they wouldn't have to work as hard.
So you mentioned festivals, right? I'm a big proponent for this. Anybody who listens to this in Maine knows this, but I manage like as much as I can manage. And when I mean manage, I mean, when we have an all-state band, I'm managing that all-state band. I get the conductor and I help pick the literature, and I do that, or for District 1 or for jazz band or whatever. I love doing that because I get to pick who I think are really good teachers. And then I get to learn from those teachers every time we have a festival. So, if you're in a place where you can manage a festival, do it, because you ensure that your kids have a good experience and you get to learn a ton. And at the same time, if you're not managing and you're at a festival, go and listen to the band. Like you might have theory work to grade, and that's fine. And you might have other stuff to do. But like if you have a great conductor there, if you get one thing from it, it's worth the time. So do your theory grades, but while you're in the auditorium, sit and listen to them talk, and you'll hear them discuss things. So I'm a big proponent of that, seeing people teach as often as you can. And I said that because you mentioned the festivals. I did want to mention one other thing. Though you talk about warming down at the end of every rehearsal. I was taught end on the cool part, the cool, strong, loud part, so when they leave rehearsal, that's what they remember, and they want to come back next rehearsal.
Well, see, because my marching season started 2 weeks before school, we spent a lot of time talking about physical health and the physical development of the instrumental player. And so that was something that we stressed, that you have to think about the physical health of the player. And, I'd be up on my soapbox saying, okay, I want you to drink a lot of water tonight. I want you to warm down. I want you to do this. And with my staff, with marching band, we did that all the time. And we just carried it directly into the concert and the jazz program. And it worked out real well. We didn't always end with the cool part, but we ended with something that we showed success. But most of the time I ended with sight reading. So sometimes reading is not the most successful thing in the world. So, but we knew that that's something we had to do, because many of the festivals we went to, whether it was IAJE or what have you, or ASBDA, you had to compete or do your festival where the last thing you did was sight read. Yep. And we came up with a system that worked well for us. And everybody thought we were nuts, because you'd get your 2 minutes for the director to look at the score, and then 5 minutes for the band to review it. And I didn't have the kids play during the review. I'd ask them their 10 key questions, key signature repeats, et cetera. And then we would start from the beginning, and we would count the rhythms from the beginning of the piece to the end of the piece. Yep. And then say, okay, it's time to play. And my colleagues would look at me like I was totally nuts. But I said, they know how to play the piece. It's just a matter of putting the fingers down.
Yep.
But I know the fingers don't all go down. At least the rhythms will be correct as we go through the piece. And if we ran into a section where the rhythm was a problem, we finish it and say, okay, rhythm, measure such and such. This is what you got to look at. It's a dotted eighth, 16th, eighth, dotted eighth, 16th, eighth, 6, 8, and 2, 1 and 3, 4 and 6. Let's review that and get stuff like that. And I'll go back to the festival thing you were talking about. I started out as you, as I was manager of everything I could be, and then in Connecticut, I ended up being the chairman of the Student Affairs Commission, which was in charge of creating these festivals and getting the guest conductors. And what we did in Connecticut when we had to get our CEUs is we came up with a plan, and that was when a director went in and watched the rehearsal, there was a person in every rehearsal awarding CEUs to directors who would come into rehearsals and sit and watch the director rehearse.
Yep.
And what that created was an atmosphere of we started buying scores, so there would be sample scores in the back of the room. So as the directors walked in, they could open a score and follow with the guest conductor what's going on.
Yep.
And I remember
it's funny. We do things so similarly, Jeff. We don't talk about that stuff, but we do exactly the same thing at Allstate. I have a bunch of scores there for people, and we haven't talked about the CEU thing, but we do have a formal way in Allstate to do that. But I feel like that should happen more at these festivals. I don't know who has to sign it, has to sign that document or whatever, but like that would be to be great, because that's the best professional development you're going to get.
Oh yeah, I knocked off all of my CEUs for a year at Allstate and at Regional Music Festival every year, because it was the greatest way. You were sitting there doing that instead of going in the back room, listening to somebody complain about why their band or the Board of Education isn't doing something. Right. On music all the time and watching, we saw Peter Boonshaft quite with Frank DeKelly. We watched them in their technique. Yon DeMay, when he came in and conducted, we just sit there, or Jeff Renshaw, seeing how they did things and how they ran a rehearsal. And then a lot of us, when we go out to dinner with them afterwards, we talk about it. We didn't just talk about mundane things. We talked about what happened in rehearsals with these guest conductors to learn what their philosophies were and why they did what they did and how they did it.
That's the way you have to be at the festival anyway with your kids. You might as well get something out of it.
Right. And learned so much. I remember when Earl McDonald came in and did All-State Jazz, it was like, knock your socks off. So many things we learned that fast. Or John Mastriani coming in and doing jazz. You learn things that you thought, well, yeah, we should be doing that all the time.
So next I want to talk about some basic tips of programming as we select the music that the kids are going to be playing. This is not a programming episode. I don't think it's more like a toolbox of things you can use in rehearsal. But I just had some notes of things. So I think we'll have an episode later about like some really good programming tips and maybe a lot of great literature that you and I maybe compile and like. And there's lots of those lists out there, right? And there's state lists and all these things. But it's also different to have experience with pieces. Like, I know this piece works for ninth graders. Or I know this piece works for X type of band or whatever. So I have a lot of things for programming that I want to talk about, because I've always prided myself in, no matter what the kids play, when they're at a performance, they sound good. No parents are going to leave going, you know what, there wasn't enough notes in the first clarinet part. They were going like, the amount of parents that have come up and said, oh my gosh, your band sounds like professionals. Now, that they don't, right? But from the untrained ear, they don't hear all the mistakes. And they're expecting to come out and hear a program that's like, oh, well, they're kids, No, like I always wanted them to sound really good. I wanted the kids to love the music that they were playing. And I wanted the audience to really enjoy listening to the music they were playing. Now, that's really hard. You might think, well, that means you're going to play all cheesy music. No. That's not how I approach it. But I approach it like I'm trying to teach the audience, but I want them to enjoy this concert. If dad and mom are coming and sitting through this concert and they're not enjoying it, well, that's going to be a big deal, right? If you want to create buzz around your program, get them to sound good. Remember when I started in the school that I'm in now in Westbrook, like, we started with stuff that was way easier than we really probably should have been playing for their age level. But they sounded so good, nobody cared. So here's a couple of my basic tips. Program what your kids need, not what you you own already, A. Just because you have it in the library doesn't mean you need to play it. Or B, what you think sounds good. Like, you might think it's a cool piece, but can your third clarinet section play that third clarinet part? Can your second alto player play that second alto part? And check out the scores, check out the parts, and is it within reach? Is it a good stretch for them? Or is it the wrong thing? So like some people will go on August 31st, they'll walk through the library, grab 3 pieces, and there's our music. You know, I think it needs to be much more thoughtful than that. I think we need to program a mixture of moods, not a mixture of styles. Not, okay, I'm going to do a march, I'm going to do a ballad, I'm going to do a focus piece. It's like, okay, like that's really well intentioned. And maybe you do end up doing that. But like, if you think of it as we're doing a really happy piece, we're doing a really like love piece, we're doing a really like angry piece, right? We're doing something that's traditional. Like you think of it that way, and then all those kids have the different personalities, and they all get to then buy into certain pieces, and it helps them express their emotions in that way too. I suggest that you think of your percussion when you do music, and that you move them around. Don't say this kid just plays snare drum, this kid just plays timpani. Find a way for them to be busy and active. And if you need to add parts, add parts. You know, find stuff that works. Like I love Frank DeKelly's music, but if you have 7 or 8 percussionists, there's just not a lot to do for them. Now, if you have 4, then it works really well. But it's hard to double or to split some of those parts up. So save those for when the band has less percussionists. I have a couple more, Jeff. Do you want to jump in, or should I keep going?
Let me just jump in. I think there's 2 things we have to think about when we program, and that is, as the conductor, are you conducting this piece because you want to have fun conducting it, or are you trying to teach your children something that they need to know? Often we go to festivals and we see conductors doing this wonderful job conducting, except what they're doing and what we're hearing aren't the same thing.
Yep.
Just because the conductor wants to challenge themselves. The other part is that when you pick your repertoire, you know your group. You know what they can achieve. You need to study the scores before you pick it and make sure that it's within their realm of achievement and growth. And I think that's the one thing some directors miss. They look for just achievement and they don't look for growth.
Yep. So if my kids work on this, they can achieve this.
Yes.
Right? And this is an opportunity for that. For example, you know, like I have my first trumpet section can consistently play, say, G, right? Now, G to A on trumpet is a tough change, but you've got some time, you know, and they've been on G for a long time. Well, this piece uses A, and maybe we're doing it because I want them to stretch to A. And maybe that's the reason that's one of the reasons why you choose that piece over another piece. Above all, we have to remember when they perform, they're going to sound good. So when you're pushing them, try to make it so that the performance, they still sound good. You know, now occasionally we've all had these things where like the performance, you listen back and you're like, ugh, like that didn't go the way I wanted it to. It didn't end up with the recording I wanted or the performance that we wanted. But then a great friend of mine, Alan King, who's just a fantastic brass teacher and friend, he always said, yeah, but Kyle, sometimes what they learned in that piece, in that instance, was more important than how they performed it. Right? Now, not that we want to not sound good, but he said, you know, it was still worth it that you did that because they learned all this stuff through that piece. And then I say, yeah, but couldn't we have done that with another piece? You know? So that hasn't happened often, but it does happen.
Okay. 1 second on what Alan's saying there. I think that's really valid, but I also come with the thing is that not every piece that I have in the book will I perform.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have a great piece of literature in there, not for the purpose of having it be performance, but because of what it teaches the kids to do.
Yes. Think about what each student is asked to play in the piece. Is it too easy? And I know too easy is a thing that doesn't really exist, right? It's not too easy. But in their mind, is it too easy? Is it too hard? Is there a mixture where it's like there's a little bit of all of it? Get the kids to buy into it and the audience to enjoy the program. Not to say that it's cheesy again, but that it's quality music and you'll create buzz. For example, there's an Arrangers Publishing piece called Divinum Mysterium, arranged by Tom Wallace, which is like this old plain chant thing. This thing just kicks. I mean, it's so good. And it's like 3 minutes long, and it's like kind of an obscure kind of piece, but it's so good. And I found it starts, I think it's F. I think it starts with F in the bells or chimes. It ends with F in the chimes. And there's another piece from the same publisher called I Saw Three Ships, right? From the famous English carol. And that starts with an F in the chimes. So what I would do is I would put the two pieces together, and we would play one right into the other one, and before you know it, it's like a Christmas tune to open a concert. That's amazing music, but it's not like really Christmassy. But it's just such good music that the kids can play. And at the end, oh my gosh, I know that tune. Oh my gosh, the band was so good. That was so great.
And you made a good point earlier. I think your idea there was really good, that the audience has to enjoy your concert as well. Yeah. And I think some directors lose sight of the fact that you can keep your kids all engaged, but if the audience walks out and says, well, that was nice. Nice is not the word that I would like to hear. Yeah. Like that, I really enjoyed that. That's what I like to hear.
And if they do that concert after concert, then you have a little bit of leash to the year I did. Did you know the piece by Dan Buckfitch, the great composer and teacher out in Idaho? It's called Unusual Behaviors in Ceremonies Involving Drums. It's like this 25-minute thing about, they did a research paper about the physiological, what happens in the brain for these African tribes when they're doing tribal drumming, these drum circles, and they go for 24 hours, and they don't use the bathroom or eat or get tired or anything, and the whole piece is around that. Well, that piece was like playing on the planet Mars for half of the piece, but because there was enough history that we had done over all these years of these concerts everybody enjoyed, I was able to put that with a couple other things people really liked, and the kids learned a bunch of things through it. So as we wrap up, students, I think, should love the music you're programming for them. Maybe not all of it, but they can grow to love it. And if they just like, this is fine, then you're not choosing the right music, right? There's such good music out there for them. I do a survey after the concerts on students' favorite pieces, as well as what did the other band play, what did they like, what did you like from them, and all that. But if a piece doesn't get any votes as somebody's favorite, I won't do that piece again. So 40 kids do votes. X piece, nobody thought it was their favorite. In the music I choose, usually it's about split evenly, that just about every piece has a large number of kids who that was their favorite piece. And sometimes you choose a piece for other reasons and it's not going to be as popular. But that's the general approach I like to take. And I strongly believe every band can sound good at performances if taught well and programmed for correctly, right? Do you choose easy enough music but also challenging enough music? And do you teach it appropriately?
No, I agree with you 100%. I think the voting is something that I used to do, especially when we come back from a festival. And I'd say, well, you went around and listened to other bands. Did you hear a piece that really knocks your shorts off and you'd like to do? And they'd come up with names. And I'd say, okay, I'll put together a list so you can find them on YouTube and you can listen to them. And let's talk about it some more. And that's how some of the repertoire we picked was because I said, we really like this piece. And, I'd like to do that. And that worked out quite well for us.
Well, thank you, Jeff. The second episode was fun. Hope people are enjoying the podcast, and we'll be back next week with you guys. Thank you for listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, if you have the time, we highly recommend the After Sectionals podcast for more great listening. Thank you for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.